The boot that split my lip belonged to a cop wearing the same badge I do. The difference was, his badge was shining on his chest, and mine was hidden in the torn lining of a thrift store coat. He thought he was kicking a useless black homeless man on the sidewalk. He had no idea he was putting his boot into the ribs of a captain from Internal Affairs, sent there to end his career. My name is Malcolm Jackson, and for 3 weeks I disappeared into the streets of my own city. Cardboard sign shelter, coffee concrete pillows, just to catch one officer who treated the homeless like target practice. What I didn't expect was to become his next victim and his last. If it were you and someone in your own uniform kicked you like you were garbage, what would you have done? Let me tell you how I got there. It started nowhere near a sidewalk. It started in a cold, humming conference room under fluorescent lights that make everybody look tired. Across the table from me, Chief Susan Clark dropped a stack of photos, like they were weighing her arms down. Bruised faces, split lips, purple ribs on gray skin, all taken under harsh booking room lights. 3 of those faces were attached to autopsy reports that said death in custody, heart failure, but the bruises told a different story. 3 deaths in 8 months. She said her voice tight but controlled, all on the same beat, all with the same officer's name in the paperwork, Trevor Wright. I'd seen Wright's file before, on paper. 28 years old, 5 years on the force, a couple of commendations, a bunch of complaints that went nowhere. On the big screen behind her, Olivia, my partner, pulled up a map with red pins clustered around 6 blocks downtown. The shelter district, I said. Olivia nodded, scrolling. Every pin is an incident where Wright had to use force on a homeless person, or where a complaint was filed and then magically disappeared. Body cams failing at critical moments, reports missing signatures, witnesses recanting after follow-up conversations with his supervisor. Same pattern, over and over. Chief Clark slid 1 photo closer to me. This is Harold Peterson, Vietnam vet 62, arrested for public intoxication, found dead in his cell. Coroner said heart failure. Look at his arms. I leaned in. The bruises on Harold's forearms weren't from falling. They were defensive wounds, the kind you get from putting your hands up while someone keeps swinging. I'd seen enough evidence photos in my 15 years in IA to know the difference. What about witnesses, I asked, even though we all knew the answer. That's the problem, Olivia said, tapping a file. Harold had a cellmate who tried to give a statement. 2 days later, he changed his story out of nowhere, said he must have been confused. Others just stop showing up, or they get picked up on some minor charge and vanish into the system. And the man who signs off on all of those reports, Lieutenant Kevin Stone, chief, finished pulling another file from the stack. Wright's supervisor. Gambling problem. Money issues, off-duty security jobs that violate department policy. We believe Wright knows about it, and Stone protects him in return. Every complaint about Wright dies on Stone's desk. I stared at the map, at the pins circling the shelters like a noose. I've seen bad cops before, seen guys lose their tempers, make terrible decisions, plant something they shouldn't lie to get out of trouble. This felt uglier, more deliberate. So what are you asking me to do? I said. The chief took a breath she didn't want to take. We need someone inside that community. Someone who can blend in live there and see what Wright does when he thinks nobody important is watching. Someone who can gather evidence that sticks. Malcolm, we want you to go undercover as homeless. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet, heavy quiet. I thought about my wife, Sarah, about my 2 teenage daughters, about missing dinners and school events and late-night conversations at the kitchen table. I thought about Harold's purple arms, about the fear on those faces in the photos. I thought about every time I'd told a victim, we'll do everything we can. Cover identity, I asked. Olivia slid a manila envelope toward me, and inside, was a whole new life. Marcus Williams. Army vet, 2 tours in Afghanistan, struggled with PTSD, lost his job, lost his apartment. We built the paper trail from the ground up. VA records, job applications, old addresses. If anyone in the department runs him in the system, it holds. It also explains why a man your age with your bearing might end up on the street. How long would I be down? I asked. Chief Clark shook her head. As long as it takes to build an undeniable pattern. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. This can't look like a setup. We can't just catch him having a bad day. We need to show a jury this is who he is, and if he figures it out. Olivia looked me in the eye. Then a violent officer who thinks homeless lives don't matter finds out he's been assaulting a captain from internal affairs and documenting his own crimes on hidden cameras. And yeah, he might decide the easiest way out is to make you disappear. So that's the game. That's the risk. You either walk away or you walk in with your eyes open. I looked at Harold's photo one last time, then at the red pins on the map, then at the chief. All right, I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. Let's go meet Marcus Williams. You ever say yes to something and only realize the full cost 3 weeks later at 3 a.m. on a wet sidewalk? Yeah, that happened. 3 weeks into the operation, Marcus Williams smelled like sweat rainwater and secondhand smoke. My back hurt from sleeping on mats that were barely thicker than cardboard when I was lucky enough to get a bed, and actual cardboard when I wasn't. I'd learned which church served hot meals on which day, which alley stayed quiet at night, which blocks you avoided. Because guys like Wright liked to patrol them, the rule out there was simple. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Don't move too fast. When you see blue and red, people watch the street the way soldiers watch tree lines, always scanning for danger. Old Eddie found me my first week standing in a soup line holding my sign, Veteran. Anything helps. He squinted at it, then at me. You mean that he asked, nodding at the word, veteran? Yes, sir. I said, committing to the Roll Army. He grunted. Me too. Welcome to the part they don't put in the recruitment ads. He showed me where the good dumpsters were, which shelters didn't kick you out at 5 on the dot. How to roll your backpack straps so nobody could cut them and run. He showed me survival, basically. One cold morning, I was sitting against the wall outside the downtown shelter, cardboard under me, back on cold brick breath fogging in the air. The sign rested on my knees. People stepped around me like I was a lamppost. Then I heard it. That familiar jingle of a utility belt, the steady, confident stomp of polished boots. You feel it before you see it. The whole line stiffened. Conversations died. Heads dipped. Those boots stopped Des Moines inches from my face. I looked up and met Officer Trevor Wright in the flesh. In his file photo, he looked like any other young cop. Square jaw high and tight haircut uniform, crisp enough to sell a recruitment poster. In person, there was something extra in his eyes, a kind of amused cruelty, like he was always half a second away from smiling at someone else's pain. He didn't say good morning. He didn't say sir. No ID, please. He just swung. His boot smashed into my side hard enough to knock the air out of me, my crooked sign flying. My head hit concrete. My lip split. I tasted blood and grit. He laughed. Get up, you worthless piece of trash. He snapped loud and sharp, making sure the line heard every word. You're making this block look bad. On the outside, I wheezed and played the role. Eyes lowered, movements, slow voice, rough. Inside, something else switched on, training observation, that IA voice that says, remember everything. The angle of the kick, the force, the way his hand rested on his baton, the little jangle of his belt when he shifted his weight, the way the woman at the end of the line flinched just hearing his voice. You can learn more about a man in one uncontrolled moment than in a whole polished interview. You know what I mean. Please, sir. I coughed, keeping my voice small. I wasn't causing trouble, just trying to get enough for a meal. He kicked my sign, sent it skidding into a puddle near the trash cans. The letters veteran, anything helps smeared with mud, and a little of my blood. This is a respectable neighborhood, he said, glancing at the shops across the street like they were his. People don't want to look at garbage like you. He demanded that was part of his pattern. Hassle people for documentation he knew they probably didn't have or couldn't keep track of. Then turn that into a reason to detain search escalate. My hands shook as I fumbled out the old wallet Olivia had built for me, complete with a very real-looking fake. Marcus Williams, Army veteran, expired address, the whole deal. He snatched it, read the name out loud like it tasted bad. Marcus Williams. Army, huh? Guess they forgot to teach you discipline over there. I served my country. Sir, I said. Steady, but careful. Things went bad when I got home. Just a bit of bad luck. He didn't even pretend to care. He tossed the ID at my feet. It landed in a puddle soaked through. Pick it up and get off this block, he said, leaning over me just enough to remind me he could kick again any time he wanted. If I see you here again, you'll find out what real trouble looks like. I scrambled on hands and knees, part acting, part real pain. And my fingers closed not just around that soggy card, but around the little bump sewn into the lining of my coat. My recorder was still running every word, every impact, every jangle of his gear. Thank you, sir, I muttered, playing the role of a broken man, just trying to avoid getting hit again. He smirked, turned his back on me, and walked away with the easy stride of someone absolutely sure nothing bad ever happens to him. When the patrol car finally moved off, Eddie drifted over like smoke. You okay, brother? He asked, eyes on my face, then on the retreating taillights. I'll live, I said. Shouldn't have to just be living, he muttered. Shouldn't be like this. Do you think that's fair? A man serves his country, ends up on a sidewalk, and the only interaction he gets from the people sworn to protect him is a boot to the ribs. What would you have done if you were standing in that line? That first beating wasn't the worst thing I watched Wright do. The worst thing I saw was in a narrow alley behind Murphy's Diner under a flickering light and the smell of old grease. That's where I saw how far he'd go when he thought nobody was watching at all. I was behind a dumpster pretending to rummage through black trash bags, while my recorder watched between two torn flaps. My body ached, my clothes stank. My eyes were used to the shadows by then. Maria Santos pulled in about 10 minutes after midnight. Small lady, early 60s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that coughed as it idled. I'd seen her around the shelters, always neat, always apologizing for being in the way, always holding her purse close. She parked under the light, because that's what women on the street do. You park where other people might see you because you are safer being seen than being invisible. Then Wright's patrol car slid into the alley, blocking her in, like he'd done it 100 times before, which he had. License and registration, he said, walking up to her window like this was a regular traffic stop. Her hands were shaking so badly, you could see it from where I hid. But she found the documents, handed them over. He looked at the address on the registration, then at her sleeping in the car. Says here, you live on Elm Street, he said. This car's registered there too. Funny, because you're not in a driveway on Elm Street right now, are you? Her voice was small, apologetic, trying not to make him mad. I used to live there, officer. I lost the apartment after my surgery. I've been staying in the car. I haven't been able to pay to change the registration yet. I'm sorry, He cut her off. So you're telling me the information you gave the DMV is false? That's a crime. Could be fines, vehicle impound, maybe even jail time. Did you catch that? She was explaining being poor. He heard opportunity. She begged him not to tow the car. You could hear the panic. This car is all I have left. Please, I'll leave. I'll park somewhere else. I swear, just don't take my car. He leaned into the window, his voice dropping. Here's what's really going to happen, he said. You're going to give me anything valuable you've got in this car. Cash, jewelry, anything worth something. That'll be your fine for lying to a cop. Then you're going to drive away, and if I see you on this block again, things get much, much worse. She stared at him, eyes wide, voice cracking. I don't have anything. I pawned my ring for gas. I've got maybe $20 and some food. He smiled, like her emptiness offended him. $20 in food. That's it. You take up space in my neighborhood, scared decent folks, and that's all you got to offer. He reached in, grabbed her purse, yanked so hard the strap snapped, and she cried out. Dumped everything onto the asphalt. Coins, receipts, a Metro card, old lipstick, pill bottles, photos. He crouched down and went through her life like it was trash he was sorting. $23 in small bills. He pocketed it. He picked up a photo. Her younger, smiling with 2 kids around 8 or 9. These your kids? He asked. My grandbabies. She whispered, reaching out like she wanted the picture back, but didn't dare grab. He looked at it for a second, then slowly tore it down the middle. Let the pieces fall. Be a shame if something happened to them, because Grandma couldn't follow directions, he said. You want to talk about evil. It's not just about how hard you hit. It's about how precisely you pick the thing that will hurt most. Then he picked up her medication bottles, reading the labels. Diabetes, blood pressure, pain meds. Man, these aren't cheap, he said. Bet you can't afford more anytime soon. She tried to stop him, voice rising for the first time. Please, no. I need those, my doctor said. If I don't take them, I could end up in a coma. He let one slip from his hand. It hit the ground, popped open, pills scattering. Another. He stepped on some. Others rolled into the gutter, into the drain, gone. Oops. He said, that same fake regret in his voice. Accidents happen. It wasn't a cop losing his temper in a scary moment. It wasn't a mistake. It was methodical, slow, deliberate cruelty. I stayed behind that dumpster with my fists clenched so tight my nails left marks in my palms. Because this is the job. You don't blow an entire investigation and lose your chance of putting a man like that away forever just to end one incident 5 minutes early. You record, you survive. You build a case that no defense attorney can spin. Did I want to run at him? Absolutely. Did I? No. I waited, my heart pounding, while Maria scrambled to pick up what few pills she could. Her knees on dirty pavement, her hands shaking. Before she pulled away, he leaned into her window one more time. I know what your car looks like. I know your face. I know your plate, he said. Remember that. You're never really out of my sight, as long as you're in this city. He drove away like it was just another stop. When he was gone, I stepped out of the shadows and picked up the torn photo he'd left, half soaked and muddy. I put it carefully in my pocket next to my hidden badge. Somewhere between that alley and the shelter, my anger turned into something sharper. This wasn't about one bad cop anymore. This was a man running a private reign of terror in a 6-block radius with a supervisor covering for him. This was what we had to stop. Stick around, because what happened next would blow his world and mine wide open. A couple days after that alley, Eddie grabbed my elbow after breakfast at the shelter. Come on, Marcus, he said. We're going to see Grace. That cut on your lip looks nasty. She's the one who'll fix it up, and she keeps us from dying out here. Grace Bennett looked like a social worker straight out of a brochure, and absolutely nothing like it at the same time. Mid-30s, tired eyes with a spark still in them. Practical clothes, a voice that could go from soft to steel in half a second. Her office at the advocacy center was a controlled kind of messy. Files, donated coats, a whiteboard listing available bed spaces around the city. Post-it notes everywhere. She cleaned my lip, dabbed at the bruises on my face and ribs, asked questions without prying too far. What happened? She asked, cotton pad in hand. Cops. I said, shrugging like it was no big deal, even though every muscle complained. One of them doesn't like seeing us near the shelter. Let me guess. She said, not missing a beat, right? I stayed quiet. She didn't need confirmation. That name lived in the air around there. I've filed so many complaints on him, she said, tossing bloody gauze in the trash. A little harder than necessary. Documented injuries, dates, times, names. They keep getting lost, or I'm told my clients aren't credible. You know how many times I've seen someone in your uniform actually punished for what he does. 0. I wanted to tell her right then. Someone heard you. Clark heard you. Olivia heard you. I'm here because of you. But the operation would have gone up in flames. So I said the only true thing I could without revealing myself. You're the only one I've seen who treats us like human beings, I murmured. Thank you for that. She smiled just a little. Somebody has to. Fast forward to that Thursday at the Salvation Army. Line down the block. Cold wind cutting through worn coats. Hands shoved in pockets. People murmuring about the sandwiches and donations waiting ahead. Grace at the front, handing out food with that same mix of warmth and weariness, treating each person like they were her neighbor. Not a problem. Then Wright pulled up parked badly on purpose at an angle that blocked half the sidewalk. Well, well, he said loudly as he stepped out, voice carrying down the line. Look at this. A whole convention of people who forgot how to work. The line tensed. People looked at the ground, shifted their weight. Grace stepped up, already tired of this script. Officer Wright? We have permits. Everything here's registered with the city. You know this. We go through this every month. He waved that off. I'm not here for paperwork. I got a call about suspicious activity. Maybe drugs, maybe stolen goods. So here's the deal. Everyone empties their pockets and bags for a search. Anyone tries to leave or refuses, they go in the car for obstruction. No, they don't. Grace said, her voice sharpening. You don't get to randomly search an entire line of people without probable cause. They still have constitutional rights. He turned on her so fast the whole front of the line flinched. Rights, he said. Laughing a humorless little laugh, lady, these things gave up their rights when they decided to live like animals. Step aside. He pointed at me. You? Marcus. We've met. You look like you enjoy attention. Get over here. I walked forward. Slow hands up, heart pounding, but face carefully scared. He made me empty my pockets. A couple crumpled bills. Some coins, my beat-up little notebook full of fake job application notes, the fake wallet, a small bag of generic aspirin. He picked up the notebook, flipped through the pages of my messy handwriting, and started tearing them out. Pages crumpled, dropping all around my feet. Fast food, warehouses, security gigs, he said, mocking it. You really think anybody wants a homeless bum walking into their business asking for work? Stop lying to yourself. Those pages were part of the cover, sure, but watching him rip them up stung anyway. Because to a guy actually living that situation, that notebook is hope. He told me to pick them up. As I bent down, his hand started roaming over my coat. Rough, hurried yanking at seams. His fingers brushed dangerously close to the hidden tech in my lining, but instead, they closed around the little bag of aspirin. He held it up. Unmarked pills, unlabeled bag. He shouted, turning for the crowd to see. That looks like possession of a controlled substance to me. Maybe distribution. Grace stepped out from behind the table, furious. Those are clearly over-the-counter pain meds. You can see the manufacturer's mark on the tablets from here. Aspirin isn't contraband, and you know it. He moved toward her, tightening his jaw. You keep defending these people. Maybe you've got something you don't want me to find, huh? Maybe I should be searching you too. Then he shoved her hard enough to slam her into the donation table. Sandwiches spilled. Clothes fell. A thermos went rolling. He grabbed that thermos, twisted off the cap. Steam rising in the cold. Coffee's hot, he said, almost conversational. Sure would be a shame if someone slipped and got burned. It was in his eyes. He was thinking about throwing it. At that exact moment, a second patrol car came around the corner. Daniel Garcia pulled up, engine, still running, eyes scanning before his feet even hit the ground. He saw me on my knees. Grace rubbing her arm, the line scattered food and clothes on the ground. Right. He called, voice steady. What's the situation here? Wright straightened like someone had hit a switch. The thermos suddenly handled with care, his tone smoothing out. Got a complaint about suspicious activity. Maybe drugs, maybe stolen properties, he said. Was conducting lawful searches when this guy got combative. Miss Bennett's been interfering, escalating things. Garcia's eyes went from Wright to me to Grace to the wrecked donation table. Miss Bennett? He asked, walking toward her. Yes, officer, she said, still breathing hard. We had a peaceful distribution going. Mr. Williams was cooperating. Officer Wright destroyed the food. Shoved me and threatened people with arrest for no reason. Garcia pulled out his notebook. I'm going to document what I see here, he said. Miss Bennett, I've heard good things about your work from my sergeant. You'll get a report number before I leave. Wright's neck flushed red. We don't need all this drama over some vagrants and a social worker who can't mind her own business, he snapped. You're making more trouble than these people are worth. Garcia met his eyes and held them. Everyone's worth getting the report right, he said quietly. You know that. It doesn't sound like much maybe if you've never been in that dynamic. But out there in that moment, it was huge. One cop gently telling another, no, we're not doing it your way this time. You ever notice how bad people handle being told no? Watch what happens next every time. That report, Garcia wrote that little notebook entry with time location names. That was the pebble that started the avalanche. The twist. On the surface, life on the street kept rolling. Same lines, same shelter schedules, same cold. On the inside of the department, something else was happening. Wright felt it. He started spending his off-duty time in front of a computer, not Netflix, not sports, databases. He dug into my fake identity harder than a routine stop required pulled strings he shouldn't have been able to pull. He ran Marcus Williams through systems he had no business touching. Found out the social security number in my file belonged to a man who died in a car accident 2 years ago. Drove by the address on my ID and found an empty lot building demolished 6 months ago. Then he did the one thing we prayed he wouldn't. He noticed me talking to Olivia. It was small 30 seconds near the public library. Here in a plain suit. Me in my homeless gear. A simple handoff of a folded receipt with a code written on it. To the average person, just a lady giving $1 to a guy outside a library. To a paranoid cop looking for threats, it was suspicious. He jotted down her plate when she drove off, ran it. Internal Affairs pool car, Marcus Williams. The homeless vet he'd kicked in front of the shelter and roughed up at the food line had some connection to Internal Affairs. He went deeper into personnel photos, height and weight entries, service records. He filtered for black males around my age with my build with undercover experience. He found my picture. Captain Malcolm Elijah Jackson, 15 years on reputation for taking down dirty cops, prior military. The trash lying at his feet on cold concrete was a man who could and fully intended to put him behind bars for decades. And here's the crazy part. That realization didn't break him in the direction you hope. It didn't make him say, I've gone too far. I need a lawyer. I need a union rep. I need to stop. It broke him in the other direction. He called Lieutenant Stone from a hallway phone voice, low words coming fast. Told him what he'd found. Told him IA was coming. Told him about Garcia's report. Grace's complaints and my presence in all of it. You've been beating an IA, Captain Stone apparently said. Stunned. You know what that means? They probably have you on tape for weeks. They decided the only way out was to discredit the investigation as entrapment. And if that didn't work, to make sure the star witness never made it to a courtroom. The hunter had just realized the deer had a rifle. He decided to shoot first. Back on the ground, I didn't know all of that yet. What I knew was simpler. Danger was getting closer. Grace pulled me aside in the shelter common room one evening. Her face told me this wasn't about bandaging cuts. Marcus, she said quietly, I need you to hear this. You know I have contacts in the department, people who still talk to me. Word is Officer Wright has been asking around about you specifically. Where you came from, whether your military story checks out who you talked to. One of my contacts said he's been pulling after-hours database searches. That's not normal. My stomach dropped just a little. What kind of questions I asked, voice staying in character, even as my brain started calculating options. Detailed ones, she said. Stuff about your unit, your deployment dates. Things that only another soldier or a cop would even know to ask. It feels off. I've seen him mad before, but this feels like paranoia. I nodded. Thanked her, told her I'd be careful, maybe move to a different block for a few days. Inside, I was already planning. Emergency beacon protocol extraction signals, meeting points for Olivia's team. But I was one move behind. That's the problem with playing chess with someone who's willing to flip the board. It was late the night it all went down. The shelter had already closed its doors. Lights dim inside. But the sidewalk outside was still alive with cigarette smoke and low conversations. I was getting ready to head around the corner to my usual spot, when that familiar engine roar cut through the quiet. Wright's patrol car rolled up and stopped hard. Grill pointed straight at me, like a threat. Headlights washed me and the shelter front in harsh white. Marcus Williams, he called as he stepped out, hand resting casually on his holster hoist too bright. We need to have a talk. Every survival instinct in every person on that sidewalk lit up at once. People melted backwards into alleys behind corners. When you've been prey long enough, you know when the predator isn't just hungry. He's desperate. Grace opened the shelter door, sensed it even faster than we did. Stepped out. Officer Wright. It's late, she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. These folks need to sleep. If you have a problem with Marcus, you can address it tomorrow through the center. There are channels for that. He smiled at her, but his eyes never left me. Actually, this can't really wait, he said, pulling something from inside his jacket because it turns out Marcus isn't exactly who he says he is. Thought you might want to know that, since you've been vouching for him. He held up a sheet of paper inside a plastic sleeve so it wouldn't get dirty. My official IA headshot stared back at me, shaved tie straight serious. This, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet, is Captain Malcolm Jackson, Internal Affairs. 15-year veteran. The man standing in front of you has been lying to you for weeks. He's not just some homeless vet. He's a rat sent to entrap honest cops. Grace looked at the photo, then at me, then at the photo again. Her face went from confusion to hurt, to something like betrayal, all in a heartbeat. Malcolm. She whispered my real name, sounding heavy, coming from her. Is that true? Are you really a cop? Masks get heavy after a while. I dropped mine. I straightened up, lost the hunch in the shoulders, let the tired but steady IA voice come through. Yeah, I said quietly, but clearly. It's true. My real name is Malcolm Jackson. I'm a captain with Internal Affairs. She took a step back like she'd been physically hit. "So it was all a lie," she said, voice cracking. "The story about your unit, about losing your apartment, all those nights on the floor in here, were we just part of your case file?" I felt that deeper than the bullet that was coming. "The name and the backstory are a cover," I said, eyes on hers. "But the part where I care about what he did, to you, to Maria, to Eddie, that's not fake. The anger, the respect, the nights on that concrete, that was me. I came here as a cop, yeah, but I'm leaving as someone changed by what I saw." Wright got tired of the emotional stuff. He reached down, pulled his service weapon, leveled it at my chest, like all of this had just been set up for that moment. "You're not arresting anybody." He snarled, his voice losing that smooth edge. "Here's what's really going to happen." An undercover officer was discovered by criminals. Things got chaotic. He reached for my gun, and I had to defend myself. That's the story. That's all anybody's going to hear. The gun looked bigger, with the barrel pointed right at my sternum. But you get used to working around guns in this line of work. You don't stop being afraid, you just get used to walking while you're scared. "You really think you can shoot a captain from IA in front of a shelter?" "And walk away?" I asked. Keeping my voice steady, Detective Park knows I'm here. Chief Clark authorized the op. "You do this, you'll have the whole department and the feds on you." He shrugged just slightly. Finger tight on the trigger. "Maybe. But you'll still be dead. And dead men don't testify. Dead men don't play recordings in court." Then faint at first, but getting louder I heard it. Sirens. Olivia's car came sliding around the corner first unmarked, but very much police, followed by Garcia and 2 IA units. Doors flew open, tires still rolling a little. Guns appeared. Shouted commands echoed off the surrounding brick. Wright, "Drop the weapon." Olivia yelled, aiming dead center at his chest. "Put it on the ground and step back now." For the first time since I'd met him, I saw real naked fear on Trevor's face. Not empathy, not shame. Fear for himself. "This is an IA op," he shouted back, still pointing the gun at me. "You aren't even supposed to be here. This is between me and Captain Jackson." Garcia had moved to the side, taking up a different angle, his gun drawn but low, his voice carrying that calm authority. Good cops learn. "Trevor, whatever's going on, pointing a gun at a fellow officer in front of civilians is not the way to fix it. Lower your weapon. We can sort this out without anybody dying. The only way I walk out of this is if he doesn't." Wright snapped, jerking his head toward me. "You think they won't throw me to the wolves to protect their precious IA captain?" Grace stood frozen just behind me, eyes wide, but steady. Eddie and a few others watched from the doorway, people who'd spent years convinced nobody would ever step between them and a violent cop. Now watching exactly that happen in real time. "You want to know what this is really about?" "Right," yelled his voice, starting to crack. "It's about them, sending him in here to spy on us, to make us out as monsters for doing what has to be done. You think those people behind you are your neighbors? They're parasites. Criminals. Garbage. I was the only one willing to keep this neighborhood clean." I shook my head slowly. Keeping things clean doesn't mean beating old men to death in cells. It doesn't mean stealing from grandmothers and crushing their meds. It doesn't mean kicking people for sitting outside a shelter they're trying to get into. That's not policing Trevor. That's you using a badge as a weapon. He pointed the gun at my head, now hand trembling just enough that I saw it. "Save the lecture," he spat. "You played dress-up for 3 weeks and now think you understand the street." Grace found her voice. "I've been here 10 years, she said, surprisingly calm. "I've watched these people share food with each other when they had nothing. I've watched them carry each other to the ER when one gets sick. In all that time, the only person who has deliberately hurt them for fun is you. That broke something in him. He swung the gun from me. Time slowed in that weird way it does when your brain is trying to process more than your body can handle. You want to protect them so bad, he screamed. Let's see who protects you. If it were you, and you saw a man like that point a loaded gun at a woman who's been patching up your wounds and feeding your people, what would you have done? I didn't think about it. I just moved. I threw myself sideways, putting my body between him and Grace. He fired. The sound was like a car backfiring inside my chest. Heat tore through my left shoulder, spinning me. I crashed into Grace, the two of us hitting the concrete hard. Pain flared bright and angry, then turned into a deep, throbbing burn. Half a second later, Olivia hit right like a linebacker, slamming him into the side of his own patrol car. His gun skidded across the pavement and clattered under another parked vehicle. Garcia rushed in. Shouting officers swarmed. Someone yelled, "Weapon secure." Someone else yelled, "Suspect in custody. Officer down GSW to the shoulder. We need medics now." Garcia bellowed into the radio. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing, and Grace's hands pressing into my shoulder, trying to staunch the blood. "Malcolm," she said, leaning over me, her voice shaking but determined. "Stay with me. Stay awake. Look at me. I'm here." I managed the words coming out on a painful laugh, just lying down on the job for a second. "You idiot," she muttered, tears in her eyes now. "You jumped in front of a bullet. Had to ruin his narrative somehow," I said, feeling the edges of my vision blur. Above us, Eddie's face appeared lined old, but lit with something fierce. "First time I ever seen a cop take a hit for us," he said softly, more to himself than to me. Maybe the world ain't completely broken. Is it though? That's the question that stuck with me through everything that followed. 6 months later, my shoulder ached when it rained, and I found myself sitting in a courtroom instead of a conference room, wearing a suit instead of a dirty hoodie, telling this story into a microphone. The gallery was full. Journalists, activists, cops, homeless folks who had scraped together bus fare to get there, people who'd heard bits and pieces and wanted to see if the system would actually do something this time. At the defense table sat a man I might not have recognized if I didn't know every line of his face by then. No crisp uniform, no polished boots, no gun. Just an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. Eyes hollow in a way I hadn't seen out there on the street. Trevor Wright, federal prosecutor Jennifer Martinez, took the jury through our evidence. The recordings from my hidden mics, the photos, the diagrams. They heard him say parasites. They heard him say animals. They heard oops accidents happen while pills skittered across pavement and a woman cried. They heard him threaten kids he'd never met through their grandmother. You could feel it in the room. The anger, the disgust, the disbelief. They listened to Maria, hands trembling on the sides of the witness box, describing watching her medication crushed under his boot, how her health spiraled after that, how she slept in her car. Terrified he would find her again. They listened to Eddie, who'd spent a decade on those streets, explaining how everyone knew Wright's schedule, like you know when a storm is coming, how people would change shelters or walk 6 extra blocks just to avoid his beat. They listened to Grace, who told them about years of complaints going nowhere, about being shoved about, watching me bleed outside her center, and realizing that for once the violence was actually being documented by someone with power. Even Stone, the lieutenant who had buried reports for him, sat there and said, I knew what he was doing. I chose to protect myself instead of them, and took his own sentence for that. The defense threw out the usual ideas, that this was entrapment, that I had pushed him, that he was under stress, that he misunderstood the situation, that I'd provoked him. They tried to paint the homeless witnesses as unreliable, drug-addicted, mentally ill, confused. But the truth had a mic this time. It had video. It had timestamps. It had my shoulder scar and Grace's bruised arms and Maria's medical records. Then they put Wright on the stand. That was something, Martinez asked him. Do you believe the homeless individuals you interacted with were entitled to the same constitutional protections as any other citizen? He didn't even bother with a nice answer. They're not citizens in any meaningful way, he said, shrugging. They're a drain. They take and take. Somebody has to protect the people who actually contribute. In that moment, he didn't sound like a cop anymore. He sounded like what he really was, a man who thought some lives just counted less. The jury took less than 3 hours, guilty on every count. Assault, battery, extortion, civil rights violations, attempted murder. At sentencing, Judge Wong did something I didn't expect. She looked out at the gallery, first at the row where Maria sat at Eddie at the folks still living one meal to the next. Then I could write. You used your badge, she said, not as a symbol of service, but as a weapon of terror against people who had no realistic way to defend themselves. You didn't just fail in your duties. You reversed them. And that cannot stand. She gave him 35 years in federal prison, no parole. Stone got 7 and a lifetime ban from law enforcement. Some people cheered. Some cried. Some just sat there in stunned silence. Is 35 years enough for what he did? Too much, not enough. That sentence kicked off debates online in roll call rooms and shelters. What should happen to officers who cross lines like that? I'm honestly curious what you think. The ripple effects went beyond one man in an orange jumpsuit. Our department changed. Not magically, not overnight, and not perfectly. But it changed. Body cams weren't optional suggestions anymore. Complaints from homeless individuals and advocates got routed to an independent board. Patterns of force were tracked, not just shrugged off as tough policing. Chief Clark created a small unit specifically to oversee cases involving vulnerable populations, homeless mentally ill folks struggling with addiction, to make sure they don't just vanish into paperwork. Grace's Advocacy Center got funding and new staff. They added therapy groups, legal aid, more outreach. They put up a new sign that still makes me a little uncomfortable when I see it. Malcolm Jackson Community Justice Center. I didn't risk my life for my name on a wall, but I understand why they did it, as a signal that sometimes someone in the system will show up for you. Garcia got promoted into a community policing role, the kind of badge work I wish was the standard. Meeting people where they are, being a familiar face, not because they're afraid of you, but because they trust you. He talks to the guys outside the shelter by name now, not as those people, but as neighbors. As for me, I went back to internal affairs, yeah, but not as the same man. Once you've slept on that concrete, and flinched at those boots, and smelled that mix of sweat and street and fear, you can't look at complainant transient male on a report the same way again. That box becomes a person in your mind. You remember that guy's voice, his laugh, the way he shared half a sandwich with someone else, even when he was hungry. I think about Harold a lot. I think about Maria's face when he tore that picture. I think about Grace stepping between him and the line, even though she knew exactly how he treated people. I think about Eddie calling me captain with a grin the next time he saw me in a suit. And yeah, I think about Wright too, sitting in a cell now, probably telling himself he was the real victim, that the world just doesn't understand what cops go through. So here's where I turn this over to you. If you saw a homeless person getting shoved around by an officer on your block, would you look away? Tell yourself they probably did something. Or would you pull out your phone record, ask questions, maybe even file a complaint? If you've ever worn a uniform yourself, how do you deal with the ones who dishonor it? Do you speak up, or do you stay quiet and hope someone else will. Do you think what happened to Wright was justice? Or do you think the system only reacted because I was wearing a badge under that dirty coat? Would it have gone differently if I had been just Marcus? With no IA file? No chief backing me? Just a cardboard sign and a bad night. If anything in this story hit you in the chest, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments what stood out. Was it Maria and her medicine? Grace and her anger Garcia stepping in? Or the moment an officer jumped in front of a bullet for people everyone else had written off? Do you believe stories like this can push the system even 1 inch in the right direction? Hit! Like if you want more stories that don't just end with, and nothing changed. Share this with someone who thinks homelessness is just a lifestyle choice, or that all cops are either heroes or villains with nothing in between. And if you've lived something like this, as a cop, as a social worker, as someone on the street, I really want to hear your version, because out there tonight on that same block, somebody's sleeping on concrete, and somebody with a badge is walking past them. The difference between a predator and a protector might come down to who's watching and who's willing to speak up. Make sure it doesn't happen in the dark.